Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, welcome back to another lesson of Mastering Tarkeeb. Inshallah, today we will be continuing from the Tarkeeb and grammatical constructions, and more specifically, we are moving on to a nat. So, a nat in English is translated as adjective. In simple terms, it's a word that describes the previous word as an adjective. For example, someone simply says in Arabic, جاء رجل صالح. A righteous man came. So the word righteous is an attribute and adjective and quality of the word rajul, so that will make salihun a nat. It's also known as sifah, and the word which the nat describes is known as man'oot. So inshallah, let's get more into the tarkeeb of a nat. So here we have at the top a nat. The first form is al-ismul mushtaq. Al-ism means noun, al-mushtaq means derivative. Now, in terms of the adjective, generally it would be a derivative noun, something that has stemmed out from a masdar. So for example, the word salihun, nasirun, abidun, these kind of words have come out from the masdar. So let's look at an example from the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions ينشئ السحاب الثقال. ينشئ السحاب الثقال, which simply translates as He forms. So أنشأ ينشئ إنشاء means to form. So Allah, He forms السحاب الثقال, heavy clouds. So السحاب means clouds and الثقال means heavy. It's in the plural form, and it's the plural of the word ثقيل. So ثقيل plural is ثقال. So here we can see that the word الثقال is forming, well, it's an attribute for the word السحاب, which means clouds. So heavy clouds. So ينشئ السحاب الثقال. So let's break this down in terms of tarkeeb. So we have ينشئ, which is فعل مضارع, فعل مضارع. And the fa'il would be the pronoun inside, which is huwa. And as-sahab, like we mentioned before, the word whose adjective is mentioned or described is known as man'oot. So in this case is as-sahab, the clouds, so heavy clouds. And the word describing the previous word is known as an-nat, the adjectives. And in this case is thiqal, which is the plural of thaqil, because as-sahab, it's in its plural form. With ta'ul wahda, it'll become one cloud. So sahabatun is a cloud, and sahab without the ta'un marbutatun will mean clouds. Okay. So now what does the man'oot and na'at become? These two will group together as sahab al-thiqal and become the maf'ul bihi of yunshi'u. So he forms the heavy clouds. And in terms of completing the sentence, it becomes jumla, fi'liya because it started with the verb yunshi'u, and khabriya because it is informative. Okay. Now, like we mentioned earlier on, that generally the na'at will be ismun mushtaqun. It'll be a derivative noun. So thiqal, okay, was the plural of thaqil. And the word thaqil actually is derived from a verb. Thaqula yasqulu thiqlan and thaqalatan, which means to be heavy. But now we're going to learn in these coming slides that sometimes the nat, the adjective, can be a jamid, a concrete noun, i.e. a noun which has not come out from a masdar, so it's not mushtaq, there's no ishtiqaq taking place, derivation, and also it's not masdar, so it's not the source word. So sometimes Naat can appear as Jāmid. So if he appears as Jāmid, a concrete noun, it can be interpreted as a derivative noun. So the first form where appears as Jāmid and it's interpreted as a derivative noun, the first form is it's appearing as Ismul Ishara. So let's look at an example. The example here is أكرم عليا هذا. أكرم عليا هذا. So which simply translates as honor Ali this one. So there's indication taking place here, Ismul Ishara. So honor Ali this one. So this Ali, honor him. So there's a clear distinction which Ali we are referring to. So how does this play out in terms of Tarkeeb and Hada acting as the Naat? Let's break it down. So Akrim is from Akrama Yukrimu Ikraman, which means to honor. So it's from Bab If'al. It's fi'lu so imperative verb. And inside the fa'il is implied, which is anta. So you honor. So it's addressing one masculine. Aliyan, we would normally stop here and say maf'ul bihi, but because we have mentioned the naat of Aliyan, which is not in his normal form, because it's normally ismul mushtaq, but we'll break it down. So Aliyan will make it man'oot. Hada is ismul ishara, but it's acting as the naat. Because it's Jamid, we'll have to interpret it as a mushtaq word. So we'll say al-mushara ilayhi. So ana Ali, the one who has been pointed at. Al-mushara ilayhi. So hada will be interpreted as al-mushara ilayhi, and that will become the na'at of aliyan. Now, someone might say, well, why can't we just say akrim hada aliyan? Well, in that situation, it won't become man'oot and nat. In order for it to become man'oot and nat, the ismul ishara will have to come after, and it'll be interpreted as al-mushara ilay. Now, what does the man'oot and nat become? This Ali. That will now become the maf'ul bihi of akrim, because we've got the verb, the imperative verb akrim, we've got the fa'il, the subject, meaning you honor, and now we're left with the object, which is aliyan hada, which consists of man'oot and na'at. And in terms of the bigger picture, it becomes a sentence. So akrim aliyan becomes a jumla. It's fi'liya because it started with the verb akrim, and it's insha'iyya because it's one of the categories of the non-informative sentences. Now moving on to our third one. So here we are covering where the na'at is jamid. It's a concrete noun, but it'll be interpreted as mushtaq. So here we have actually it's come as Masdar. So huwa rajulun adlun. Huwa rajulun adlun. Translation is he is a very just man. Now someone may ask that huwa means he, or rajulun means man, and adlun means just. Where do you get the meaning of very? I'll explain that. Normally we will see that you use asma'un mushtaqatun, derivative nouns, as attributes, qualities, adjectives. Adlun is actually Masdar. Huwa rajulun adilun will translate as he is a just man. So adil. However, when you bring Masdar, which in this case we can, it adds more emphasis to the sifa. So it's more profound to say huwa rajulun adlun than huwa rajulun adilun. Why? It's in other words like saying he is a man, and adl means justice. It don't mean someone who's just. It means justice. He's so just that he embodies the word justice. So it's like as if he is justice. So it's more profound to say adlun than adilun. So that's where we get the meaning of very. There's more stress added. And this can not only function as nat, it can even be when you're saying as a normal mubtada khabar sentence. So you'd say ar-rajulu adlun. The man is very just. as opposed to Rajulu adilun, the man is just. Adlun, you can bring, the khabar as a masdar straight up, but it'll add more emphasis. So, another example could be Rajulu, instead of saying Nasrun, you say Nasrun. The man is a helper, but he's helped so much, he embodies the word help. So you just say Rajulu Nasrun, the man is help, i.e., he's very, assisting and helping. So here, anyway, the nat has come in the form of a masdar. So huwa is a ismul ishara, it's a dhamir, it's a pronoun, still a noun at the beginning of a sentence, so it'll take the role of mubtada'un. That leave everything else to become the khabar, but before we make it the khabar, rajulun is compounded with a nat, an adjective. So rajulun is man'oot, adlun will be nat, but it'll be interpreted as ismun mushtaqun, i.e. adilun. And the man'oot and nat will now form to become the khabar of huwa. And the mubtada and khabar, these two will group together and will become jumla ismiya because it started with a noun, and khabariyatun because it is informative. So jumla ismiya, khabariya. Moving on to our next one, we see that the nat appears as jamid, but it's interpreted as a mushtaq word, and more specifically, we're talking about the word dhu, which translates as recipient or owner. So let's look at an example. جاء رجل ذو علم. جاء رجل ذو علم, which translates as a man of knowledge. So ذو means of, علم means knowledge, so رجل means man. So a man of knowledge, جاء means came. جاء means came. So let's break this down. جاء is a past tense verb, so فعل ماضي. رجل, before we make it a fa'il, is man'oot because we have mentioned the adjective of rajulun. So the adjective, the sifah, the nat appears as jamid. So dhu, it's not a derivative noun, it's not a masdar. So dhu works with idafa, annexation. So dhu is mudaf, ilm is mudaf ilay. The mudaf ilay, dhu ilmin, will group together and become the nat of rajul. Now, to interpret dhu ilmin as a mushtaq word, because sahib is a mushtaq word, and it's actually derived from the verb sahiba yashabu suhbatan and sahabatan, also sihabatan, and it means to become a companion or an associate. So from bab sami'a yasma'u. So sahib is one who is a companion. So a companion of knowledge, one who possesses knowledge. Okay, so dhu ilmin will be interpreted as sahibu ilmin, and that will become the nat of rajulun. Now, in terms of completing the sentence, this part of the sentence, the man'oot and nat will group together and become the fa'il of ja'a, because if we've got the verb, it's in the active voice, so it requires the active subject, which is rajulun, dhu ilmin. And in terms of the bigger picture, it becomes a sentence, so jumla fi'liya because it started with the verb ja'a, and khabriyatun because it is informative. Our next one is similar to the previous one, but in this situation, we're using the word that. Now, that is the feminine version of dhu. Because we was talking about the masculine in the previous slide, or rajulun, if somebody was to use a feminine word, let's say, for example, we say ja'at imra'atun, so a woman came of knowledge, we'll say dhatu ilmin. So this is a separate example we just gave because sometimes, it's good to mention the feminine version of certain words because some might think that it's two different words in terms of its meaning. Portray the same meaning, but it's just one's used for masculine, one is used for feminine. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, أَنْبَتْنَا بِهِ حَدَائِقَ ذَاتَ بَهْجَةٍ. obviously in the verse, if I'm not wrong. فأنبتنا به حدائق ذات بهجة. So for the purpose of ease for Tarkeeb course, we just mentioned parts of the verse. What does this translate as? أنبتنا, then we caused به, with it, to grow حدائق ذات بهجة, glamorous gardens. So حدائق means gardens, it's the plural of حديقة, and ذات, which means of, and بهجة literally means glamour. So the literal translation would be, we cause to grow with it gardens of glamour. Well, garden of glamour can be translated as glamorous, and we learn why. Okay, because that bahja, it's jamid, but it will be interpreted as a mushtaq word. So ambatna, let's break this down. It's fi'lun madin, and the fa'al is na. So it's from the verb pattern ambata yumbitu imbatan, from babi fa'al, which means to cause to grow. Now bihi is the prepositional phrase jar majrur, and that will be connected to the verb ambatna. That leaves everything else, inshallah, is going to become the maf'ul bihi. But before we make it the maf'ul bihi, the word hadaiqa has been compounded as an adjective phrase. So hadaiqa is man'oot, so gardens of glamour. So dhata works as idafa, like we learned from the word dhu. This is just the feminine version. Bahjatin will be the mudaf ilay. Now the mudaf ilay now will be grouped together and interpreted as ismun mushtaqun. So here we will translate bahja as bahijatan. Bahijatan. This is where we get the meaning of glamorous. Okay, because the word bahijatan actually stems out from the verb pattern bahuja yabhuju. Okay, and you could say the descriptive form is bahij, and the feminine version of that is bahijatan, like karuma yakrumu, kareem. So bahuja yabhuju, bahij, and the feminine version is bahijatan, because it's referring to gardens, which is feminine. So here dhata bahjatin will be interpreted as bahijatan, i.e. ambatna bihi hadaiqa bahijatan, and we cause to grow with it glamorous gardens. So the man'oot and nat, in terms of the bigger picture, what does this become? It becomes the maf'ul bihi of ambatna. It becomes the maf'ul bihi of ambatna. And now completing the sentence in terms of, is it jumla ismi or jumla fi'liya? It's jumlatun fi'liyatun, because it started with the verb ambatna, and khabriyatun because it is informative. Now moving on to our sixth form that we see is Jāmid. It will be interpreted as a mushtaq word, a derivative noun. However, on the apparent it's actually ismun mawsulun, a relative pronoun. So let's look at an example. جاء الرجل الذي اجتهد. So جاء الرجل الذي اجتهد, which simply translates as the man who worked hard came. The man who worked hard came. So اجتهد, worked hard or strove. So in terms of the tarkeeb, let's break it down. جاء is past tense verb. فعل ماضي from جاء يجيء مجيئا, which means to come. الرجل, before we make it the fa'il, the active subject, it's compounded with a nat, so we are going to say it's man'oot. And we mentioned this in our first few lessons, that if we have a noun which is definite with the definite article al, so الرجل, the man, we're not saying a man, جاء الرجل, we're saying جاء الرجل. So if we have a noun which is definite via the definite article al, and we want to mention a sifa of this noun, but in the form of a sentence, i.e. ijtahada in this case, then we need the intervention of a ismun mawsul. So it'll be incorrect to say جاء الرجل اجتهد. And why? Because mawsuf sifa, we learn from the grammar books that it has to correspond in being either definite or indefinite, i.e. ta'rif and tankir. There are other aspects as well, but this is not the place to go into all those situations. However, they can be found in the grammar books. The purpose of here is just explaining the grammatical constructions. So let's look at the first word, ar-rajul. It is definite because it has the word definite article al. Now, if you look at the next word, which is ijtahada, there's nothing suggesting that this sentence, he who, put effort, there's nothing suggesting this being ma'rifah. And we did mention sentences are actually deemed to be nakiratun, indefinite. That's why they can play the role of becoming khabar, because khabar is generally nakiratun, indefinite. So ijtahada, if it's a sentence and sentences are deemed to be indefinite, then this will not allow this word ijtahada to become the sifa of ar-rajul, because there's no correspondence in ta'rif, both being definite. So how can we make this possible? Well, there is a way, and you just add a relative pronoun before the verb. So in this case, alladhi. So جاء الرجل الذي اجتهد. The man came who worked hard, who strove. So الذي has now allowed the sentence اجتهد to become the naat of الرجل. Why? Because the ismun mawsul with the jumlatul sila will become the naat of الرجل. Also the word الذي has the word al. Look at the word الذي. It's got the word al. Okay, so الرجل al. So both have got the definite article al. So this is how you can make a jumla, a sifa for a ma'rifa word. How about if this word was to be nakiratun? So we used to say a man came, ja'a rajulun. Would we need the intervention of alladhi? No, absolutely not. Because why? Alladhi is ma'rifa. Rajulun in that case would have been nakiratun. So in that situation, there is no need for the intervention of alladhi. One would just simply say ja'a rajulun ijtahada. A man came who tried hard. So جاء رجل اجتهد, no intervention of الذي, because in that case اجتهد, the sentence is nakiratun, and the man'oot, i.e. رجل, would be also considered to be nakiratun, indefinite. So it's only when we have a ma'rifa word and we want to bring the sifa as a sentence, there needs to be intervention of ismun mawsulun, as in this case. So I hope you've understood that. So alladhi is ismun mawsul, the relative pronoun, and he has a clause. So here, the one who worked hard. So ijtahada is past tense verb. The fa'il is hidden inside, which is huwa, and he refers back to aqrabul ism. So here in this case, ismun mawsul. In essence, it's referring back to the man, but because there's indication, there's some kind of reference in alladhi. So normally the dhama'ir refer back to ila aqrabil ism, to the closest noun. So in this case, we'll say it's referring back to alladhi. So ijtahada will become the relative clause. Jumlatus sila. Jumlatus sila. Now, what does the mawsul sila become? These two will group together and be interpreted as al-mujtahidu. So the bigger picture we was doing was that naat appearing as a concrete noun, and it's interpreted as a mushtaq word. So in this case, alladhi is not a derivative noun. It's not come out from a masdar. It's not masdar itself. It's actually considered to be jamid. But along with the mawsul, it'll be interpreted as a mushtaq word, and in this situation, al-mujtahid. which is the active participle of ijtahada. So ijtahada, yajtahidu, mujtahidun means one who strives, and it'll be brought with al, interpreted with al because ar-rajul. So jaa ar-rajulul mujtahidu, the hard-working one, the hard-working man came. Now al-mujtahid, we've interpreted that, and that will become the na'at of ar-rajul. The man'ut and na'at will group together now and become the fa'il of ja'a. It'll become the fa'il of ja'a. Now the past tense verb ja'a with the fa'il will complete it and become a sentence or jumlatun, fi'liyatun because it started with the verb ja'a, and khabriyatun because it is informative. Now moving on to our seventh form, it still is Jāmid, it's a concrete noun, it'll be interpreted as a derivative noun, however indicates towards a number, an amount which is described. So let's look at this example. Ja'a rijalun is supposed to be rijalun, so there's a bit of a mistake there in terms of the vowel marking. So let's correct that. Okay, so rijalun. Change that to black. Oh, sorry. That's supposed to be two harakats we've got wrong, so let's get rid of that one as well. Accidentally done it in black. Okay, there we go. So ja'a rijalun arba'atun, which simply means, okay, that 4 men came. Ja'a rijalun arba'atun. That the word number 4 is not actually a derivative noun. It's not even a masdar, the source word. So let's break this down. Ja'a is a past tense verb, we know from the previous slide, which means came. Rijalun means men, but we've mentioned the adjective and attribute of rijalun, which is 4. So rijalun is man'ut and arba'atun is the na'at. Now normally, if we mention numbers first, then it'll be a mudaf ilayh construct. So it'll be ja'a arba'atu rijalin. And the word obviously arba'atun will be feminine because it'll contradict the ma'dud, the word or the thing counted. So if the number came first, it will be mudaf ilayh construct. Ja'a arba'atu rijalin. However, if the number comes after, then it'll be interpreted and it'll be actually considered to be the na'at. And that's the case here. Ja'a rijalun arba'atun. So rijalun will be man'ut, arba'atun will be interpreted as ma'duduna bihadha al-adadi, i.e. men came who can be counted with this amount, this number, i.e. 4. So جاء رجال معدودون بهذا العدد or بأربعة. So men came who can be counted with 4, as 4. So the man'ut and na'at will now group together and become the fa'il of ja'a. So notice here, arba'atun, the main thing is it's Jāmid and it'll be interpreted as mushtaq. So mushtaq here is ma'dudun, which is ismul maf'ul, the passive participle of adda ya'uddu. And in terms of completing the sentence, it becomes jumla fi'liya because starting with the verb ja'a, and khabriyatun because it is informative. Let's get rid of those annotations, inshallah. Quite a few we did, so hopefully we got rid of all of them. Okay, next one, it's Jāmid again. It'll be interpreted as a mushtaq word, derivative noun, but however indicates towards a simile, tashbih. So let's look at an example. جاء رجل ثعلب. Now the word ثعلب means a fox. Hence we see the expression sly as a fox. So how to translate this? A treacherous man came. Someone who cheats, deceives, lies, is treacherous. جاء رجل ثعلب. So we won't translate here a foxman came, because ثعلب, yes, it's Jāmid, but it'll be interpreted as treacherous, and we'll explain how we're going to interpret it, which word will be interpreted as. So جاء again, past tense verb, so فعل ماض. رجل is منعوت, because we mentioned the sifa after, which is ثعلب. We're not going to mention the literal meaning of ثعلب. However, it'll be interpreted as محتال. So احتال يحتال احتيالا means to be treacherous, to deceive, okay, to be sly. So جاء رجل ثعلب, a treacherous man came. You know, a man came who was sly as a fox. Okay, so ثعلب. So it's Jāmid. It'll be interpreted as a mushtaq word, in this case muhtalun, and it'll become the nat of Rajulun. Now, completing this, obviously the man'ut and nat Rajulun ثعلب will become the fa'il of جاء. And in terms of completing the sentence, it becomes jumla fi'liya, because starting with the verb جاء, and khabriyatun, because it is informative. Now moving on to our ninth form, same thing, it's Jāmid, it'll be interpreted as a mushtaq word. However, in this case, more specifically, it's actually an indefinite noun. النكرة المرادة بها الإبهام. So it's a nakira word, it's indefinite, but what's intended by it is something anonymous. So let's look at an example. أكرم رجلا ما. أكرم رجلا ما, which means honor any man. Honor any man. Where do you get the meaning of any? From this ma, which comes for ibham. It comes to denote something being anonymous. Okay, something non-specific. So let's break this down in terms of tarkeeb. Akrim is fi'lu amr, so it's in the imperative verb. The fa'il is implied inside, which is anta, so it's addressed to one masculine. You honor. Rajulan, we're going to make it man'ut before we make it the maf'ul bihi, because the sifa is mentioned, which is not in its normal form. So the ma here is for ibham, and it'll be interpreted as mutlaqan, something unrestricted. So honor any man without any restriction, no one specific. So mutlaqan, the opposite of that would be something muqayyadan, specific. So here the ma is for ibham, so it gives a meaning of generality. The man'ut and nat here will group together and become the maf'ul bihi of akrim. And then completing the sentence, it becomes jumla fi'liya, because it started with the verb akrim, and insha'iyatun, because it's imperative, and fi'lu am falls under the non-informative sentences. Our 10th form of a nat is Jāmid, again, which will be interpreted as a mushtaq word. However, in this case, it's actually the word kul, which indicates towards the completeness of the qualified noun, to the attribute. So in other words, the attribute which is found in the mawsuf is actually complete. So let's look at an example. أنت رجل كل الرجل. أنت رجل كل الرجل. So how we're going to translate this? You are a complete man. So you're talking to someone, and mashallah, is brave, is courageous, and you say, Anta rajul kullu rajul. You are the man, you are complete man. So here, kull actually is a word which is Jāmid. It's not derived from a masdar, it's not masdar itself. You don't have a word pattern, where this has come out from. So it's Jāmid, but we're going to interpret this as a mushtaq word. So let's break this down in terms of tarkeeb. Anta is mubtada'un, so it's a pronoun. Anta is a dhamir. Okay, so it's a pronoun. So pronouns are still considered to be nouns. So a noun at the beginning of a sentence will be known to be mubtada'un, the nominal subject. Before we make Rajulun the khabar, it's actually compounded with a sifa, the na'at. So Rajulun will make a man'oot, and now let's form the sifa. It's involved in idafa, so kul works with idafa. So kul is mudaf, and that'll make the word al-rajul mudaf ilayh. Now the mudaf ilayh will be interpreted as a mushtaq word. So in this case, we'll say kamilun fir rujuliyyati, i.e. you are a man who's complete in being a man. Okay, so anta rajul kullu rajul. So the word kullu rajul will be interpreted as kamilun fir rujuliyya. Okay, and the word kamil actually is the active participle, which means to be complete. And it's from obviously kamala yakmulu, and we can even bring it from kamula yakmulu, and also kamila yakmalu. So it comes from bab nasara yansuru. It can also come from bab karuma yakrumu, and also bab sami'a yasma'u. So kamala yakmulu, kamula yakmulu, and kamila yakmalu, and kamalan, which means to be complete. So kamil is the active participle of that verb. So this is how we will interpret it as a mushtaq word. So أنت رجل كل الرجل أي كامل في الرجولية. And now the منعوت النات رجل كل الرجل will group together and become the khabar of the word أنت, which was مبتدأ. Now completing the sentence, it becomes jumla ismiyatun because it started with the noun أنت, which is a pronoun, and khabariyatun because it is informative. Now moving on to our 11th form of a nat, which is Jāmid. Again, it's concrete noun. It's mu'awwal. It's going to be interpreted as a mushtaq word. However, in this case, it's the word ayyu, and it indicates toward the complete. It's supposed to be istikmal al-mawsuf lis-sifa, a bit like the previous one. So here we have ja'a rajulun ayyu rajulin. So just to give a little bit of a different translation, a man came, what a man. So ayyu can normally be used for istifham as well. Like in the Quran, فَبِأَيِّ حَدِيثٍ بَعْدَهُ يُؤْمِنُونَ. So which discourse would you bring faith upon now? So أَيُّ رَجُلٍ. So جَاءَ رَجُلٌ أَيُّ رَجُلٍ. A man came, what a man. So in other words, the nat is describing the completeness of the man'oot. Okay, which is رجل. So let's break this down in terms of tarkeeb. جاء is فعل ماضٍ. رجل, before we make it the fa'il, is man'oot. Now ayyu works with idafa. It's a bit like the previous one, kullu. And it's marfu here because it's becoming the sifa of rajulun. And that's one thing else we learn from the grammar books as well, that mawsuf and sifa, the man'oot and nat, will agree in 4 things. Gender, so tadhkir and ta'nith, definiteness and indefiniteness, so ta'arif and tankir, singular, plural, dual, so in number, and also in i'rab, raf, nasb, and jar. So if the man'oot is marfu, the nat will also be marfu. If the man'oot is mansoob, the nat will also be mansoob. If the man'oot is majroor, the nat will also be majroor. So that's why we can see here, ja'a rajulun ayyu. It's not saying ayya or ayyi, and rajulin. So ayyu works with idafa, so it's mudaf. They'll leave the word rajul to become mudaf ilayh. So rajulin is mudaf ilayh. Now the mudaf ilayh, ayyu rajulin, now that will become the nat of rajulun, but we will interpret it as a mushtaq word. So same thing as before as well, kamilun fi rujuliyya, complete in being a man. Okay, so a man came who was complete in being a man. I mean, complete. He had the attributes fully of being, courageous and bold as a man. The man'ut and nat here will group together and become the fa'il of ja'a. Become the fa'il of ja'a. And in terms of completing the sentence, it becomes jumla fi'liya because started with the verb ja'a, and khabriyatun because it is informative. Now move on to the next one. Same as the previous one, but this time we're using the word ayyuma. Ayyuma. So let's break this down. Ja'a rajulun ayyuma rajulin. So a man came, what a man indeed. So just give you a little bit of a different spin in terms of translation, but you can make up a better translation than myself. So here sometimes ayyuma, or like it functions like the word ayyu and kullu. So we learn it works as idafa. What's this ma will come across inshallah. Rajulun will become the man'ut. So ja'a is past tense verb, which means came. Rajulun is man'ut, like we just mentioned before making the fa'il. Ayyu is mudaf, the ma is za'ida. So sometimes we see that the ma don't actually have a role in terms of its grammatical function, but however it will impact the meaning. So when we say this word is za'ida, it's not just that it's redundant and surplus, it actually impacts the meaning, it reinforces. So فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. So the ma there as well, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ. So why is it rahmatin? Because of the ba. The ma is za'ida. So through Allah's mercy. So if you're going to add emphasis, probably Allah's, infinite mercy. So this is where the translators, those who actually take grammatical aspects into account, will reflect suitable translations when translating. That's why the Quran literally, it cannot be translated. An attempt can be made to give, the meaning of the Quran, but the actual, translation is not an accurate account of what's the message given in the Arabic language. That's why it's very important that one makes an effort to, learn the Arabic language. So the ma here is za'ida, rajulin is mudaf ilayh, because ayyu works with idafa. So this one probably will be more profound, ayyuma, because it's got the ma za'ida as well. So a man came, what a man indeed. So we've added the word indeed, where from? Because of the ma za'ida. That reinforces the meaning. Okay, so the mudaf ilayh here will become the na'at of rajulun. So when we interpret it as a mushtaq word, in all three examples, you can give the same kind of interpretation. Kamilun fi rujuliyya. Now the man'ut and na'at here will group together and become the fa'il of ja'a. The fa'il of ja'a. And then obviously fi'l and fa'il will become jumlatun fi'liyatun because it started with the verb, and khabriyatun because it is informative. Moving on to our 13th form is al-ism al-mansub. So there's a shift. Okay, we're moving on to different forms of nat. We can still consider it probably to be Jāmid. Okay, so let's look at an example. رَأَيْتُ رَجُلًا مِصْرِيًّا. What's al-ism al-mansub? It's a noun that shows attribution, and that is normally signified with a ya mushadda. So for example, Hind means India, Hindiyun means Indian. And for the feminine version, one will say Hindiyatun. So Pakistan is Pakistan. But you want to add attribution to this word, so Pakistaniyun for masculine version, and for feminine version, Pakistaniyatun. Because there's no P in Arabic. So what will replace the P in Arabic? The Ba. That's why some people have the habit of saying, instead of saying Pepsi, they say Bebzi. So رأيت رجلا مصريا. What's the translation of this? I saw an Egyptian man. رأيت رجلا مصريا. So we can see here, this word which is acting as the sifa of rajulan is al-ismul mansub. This is with the C, not with the sad. Okay, and an attributive name. So basically, there's some kind of association and attribution taking place. I.e., this has been attributed to Egypt. So Egyptian. So رأيت would be فعل الماضي. The fa'il is the ta. رجلا would be the man'ut, and misriyan, which is al-ismul mansub, will be the na'at. So we can actually consider this to be Jāmid as well, but it's interpreted as a mushtaq word. So how do you make this as mushtaq? Misriyan will be interpreted as mansuban ila Misra. I saw a man who is attributed to Egypt. So this will be like kind of giving a breakdown of how this falls as being a nat, because in nat we mentioned the asal, the origin of nat is that it's a derivative noun. It's something that has stemmed out from the masdar. So how are we going to interpret this as a mushtaq word? We make it mansuban ila misra, and mansuban with a sin, remember, not with a sad, because with a sad obviously means a word which is in the accusative state. So with the sin, it actually is derived from the verb nasaba yansubu, from nasara yansuru. So nasaba yansubu or nasaba yansibu, nasabatan and nisbatan, which means to relate, okay, to link something, to attribute something. So mansub means something that has been attributed. So it's the passive participle of nasaba yansubu or nasaba yansibu. And the man'ut and nat here will become the maf'ul bihi wa ra'aytu, because it's the object, that's who I saw. And in terms of the bigger picture, it becomes jumla fi'liya because it started with the verb ra'aytu, and khabriyatun because it is informative. Okay, moving on to our 14th form is it's Jāmid, which is obviously we've done something before as well. So here we have فيهما عينان نضاختان, which translates as in there are two gushing springs. So obviously this is a verse of Surah Al-Rahman where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. As for the one who feared his Lord, he'll have two gardens. And some say, why does he have two gardens? Because he feared Allah in, sir wal alaniya, in, secrecy, in secret, and also in his public matters. Both situations, he feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or some say he actually feared Allah in the awamir and nawahi, so the do's and the don'ts. So when it came to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he did those things. So for example, salah, etc. And the prohibitions, so backbiting, lying, drinking alcohol, drugs, etc. he abstained. So there's two spectrums to this. So there's two sides. So you have the prohibitions and you have the commands. So because he feared Allah in both, for him is two gardens. So فيهما عينان نضاختان. So in there, meaning in these two gardens are two gushing springs. So عينان means springs and نضاختان means gushing. So let's break this down. So fi is jar, hima is majroor, and the prepositional phrase comes at the beginning of a sentence. Most likely it's going to become khabar muqaddam, and in this case it is. We're going to connect it to that which is hidden, which is ka'inatan, because aynan is a feminine word. Okay, so ka'inatan becomes khabar muqaddam. Before we make aynani naddakhatan the mubtada, it's actually compounded with a sifa. So aynan is man'ut, that leaves naddakhatan to become the nat. And the man'ut and nat will become mubtada'un mu'akhkhar. And in terms of completing the sentence, it's jumla ismiya because it started with a noun. Yes, it started with a preposition, but in terms of status, the mubtada will be considered to be the main component of the sentence. And in terms of its status, it'll actually be considered to be advanced. But in the sentence, because of the rule, there's a rule in Arabic that if the mubtada is an indefinite noun, so in this case, aynan is indefinite, it's not specific. And the khabar, the predicate, is a prepositional phrase, then it's wajib, it's compulsory to advance the prepositional phrase which acts as the khabar before the mubtada, which is indefinite. So that's why we're saying فيهما عينان نضاختان. In it are two gushing springs. What happens if you bring the word عينان نضاختان before فيهما? Well, if that's the situation, then it will be an incomplete sentence. So if it was to be عينان نضاختان فيهما, it would mean two gushing springs which are in it. In them. Okay, in them too. So it won't be a complete sentence. So for it to be a complete sentence, the prepositional phrase has to come before the mubtada, which is indefinite. And the main thing is naddakhatan here is the nat in its 14th form, which is jamid. Okay, here we have not interpreted it as a mushtaq word. Next, we see that the nat can come as shibhul jumla, i.e. a prepositional phrase. So we have here جاءكم رسول من أنفسكم. جاءكم رسول من أنفسكم, which means a messenger from among yourselves came to you. جاءكم means came to you. So we've seen here Rasulun means messenger, and the sifa of this messenger from amongst yourselves is a prepositional phrase. Now there's a little trick to understand here. If you have a nakiratun word, a word which is nakiratun, and you have a prepositional phrase, in Tarkeeb it will be man'oot and nat. If this word was to become ma'rifah, then it will become dhul hal and hal. And this is something that we covered in the first few lessons in mastering Tarkeeb. Why is it sometimes we see that the prepositional phrase sometimes is acting as the nat, sometimes is acting as the hal circumstantial phrase, sometimes is actually acting as the khabar? Well, it depends what the prepositional phrase is actually referring to. If it's linked to a nakiratun word, so in this case it'll be man'oot and nat. If before it there's a ma'rifah word, mid-sentence, it'll be dhul hal and hal. However, if it was to be beginning of a sentence, the ma'rifah word, it'll be mubtada khabar. Okay? So, let's just say, for example, it was to be ja'akumur rasulu, the messenger who came to them, whilst he was from amongst themselves. So that will become dhul hal or rasul, and min anfusikum will become the hal. So came to them the messenger, him being from themselves. This one is man'oot and nat. A messenger came to them who was from themselves, amongst them. And a mubtada khabar will be, let's just say, ja'akum is not there. We say ar-rasulu min anfusikum. The messenger, and then min anfusikum will be the khabar, was from among them. Was from among them. So this is how you can tell the difference between man'oot and nat, dhul hal hal, mubtada khabar, when we're dealing with a prepositional phrase. So let's break this sentence down. So جاءكم, جاء is fi'l madin. The kum is the zamir mansub muttasil. It's a pronoun which is in the accusative state because it's the object, maf'ul bihi, and normally the object comes after the fa'il. But because here it's a pronoun, it's attached to the verb, it's muqaddam, it's been advanced. Rasulun, before you make it the fa'il, because came to you a messenger, we're going to say it's man'oot, because the nat here has come in the form of shibhul jumla, something that resembles a sentence, and in this case the prepositional phrase. So min is jar, anfus is mudaf, kum is mudaf ilay. The mudaf ilay will group together and become majroor because we have the min harf jar, and then the jar majroor, the prepositional phrase, will become connected to that which is hidden, and in this case we'll assume the word ka'inun. I ja'akum rasulun, came to you a messenger, ka'inun min anfusikum, who was from yourself, or was from among you. And then ka'inun min anfusikum, this will become the nat of rasulun. Man'oot and nat will group together and become the fa'il of ja'akum. Remember, we had the maf'ul bihi coming first, so this will be fa'il mu'akhar. So probably would have been better to put the word mu'akhar. And in terms of the bigger picture, it becomes jumla, sentence, fi'liyatun because it started with the verb ja'a, and khabariyatun because it is informative. So alhamdulillah, That's 15 forms of Naat complete. We, alhamdulillah, intend to go to about 30 forms of a Naat. So we're at the halfway point of a Naat, and hope you've found this lesson interesting and you've learned the different forms of a Naat that it can appear in, and more specifically Jāmid, and then it's interpreted. There are other forms as well, which are easy ones that can be found in the grammar books as well. If anybody is interested in our courses, you can log on to www.sidrainstitute.com, where you will find our Arabic rhetoric course, Arab course, inflection and declension in Arabic, how to know vowel markings, diacritical markings in Arabic. Obviously, we have this course, Mastering Tarkeeb course. We have some free courses as well, how to search for words in the Handsway Dictionary, etc. One piece of good news, inshallah, on this coming Thursday, for 3 days, there's a Balagha intensive course, which we, inshallah, intend to host. So it will be this coming Thursday, 5 p.m. till 8 p.m. UK time. That will be on the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So 5 p.m. UK time till 8 p.m. UK time. So 3 hours each day. So 9 hours of content, inshallah. And it's a crash course or Balagha intensive, if you want to call it. And if you have not registered, then you can register by going onto www.sidrainstitute.com, and you will find on the website the information in regards to the coming winter intensive Balagha course. So for now, assalamu alaikum.